Namaskaram and good evening to all. So today is the holy day of Buddha Purnima. On this occasion, we will discuss about the life and teachings of Bhagavan Buddha. So we shall begin with the mantra. Om Stapakaya cha dharmasya sarva dharmasvarupine avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. So as we speak about Bhagavan Buddha, we all know the association of Swami Vivekananda and direct disciples with Bhagavan Buddha and his teachings. During 1886, Swami Vivekananda, when he was serving Sri Ramakrishna at Kasipur Garden House, he abruptly left for Bodh Gaya, along with later Swami Abhedananda and Shivanandaji Maharaj. So they went to Bodh Gaya and they began meditating, sitting near the Bodhi tree. So during that time, Swami Vivekananda experienced an overwhelming emotion thinking about the personality of Bhagavan Buddha, or he had some divine realization. So because of that, he felt an overwhelming emotion. Later on, after that, he embraced Swami Shivanandaji Maharaj. And Swami Vivekananda, as we know, he paid high tributes to Bhagavan Buddha. We can see many of his lectures, or a few lectures on the topic of Bhagavan Buddha, and there are many references in his complete works about where he has mentioned Bhagavan Buddha. So the religion, the Buddhism, which the followers of the Buddha, which they later, which came into being, it is both a way of life and it is both a religion. So Buddhism, in a sense, as we call, which was devised by the Buddha, it was meant to steer clear away from the rituals. So in those days, during the period of Bhagavan Buddha, we find there are the lifestyle of an ordinary human being is bound by rituals. There were rituals connected in the day-to-day life. The day-to-day life of an ordinary person is completely governed by rituals. And not only that, rituals which were instituted as a proper religious practice to arrest the change of gunas, or to contain the change of gunas, or to increase the propensity of sattva, as later on it became a kind of a mechanical work. The rituals that people, when they started doing, which was meant to arrest the change of gunas or to increase the sattva level in a human being, later on it became a mechanical job, or later on it became mechanical. So people, they thought that they can escape from the fate of their karma just by performing rituals. Just by performing rituals, or just by bathing a number of times in a day, or just by visiting temples, the people believed that they can come out of the bad karma, or they can come out of the wrongdoings that I have done. My spiritual portion is complete. Therefore, I can be what I am as usual. So there was a neglect in a person's moral development. So people were under the impression that this ritual is the final thing. If I perform this particular ritual for an n number of times, for an n number of days, I will be granted liberation. So that was a wrong notion which was prevalent at that time. So when Buddhism came into effect, it shattered all these wrong notions. So it said that a person should focus on the moral and the spiritual development. So therefore, Buddha instituted the Eightfold Path, wherein he describes, so what is the right way of leading a life, what is the right thoughts, so what is the right livelihood, what is the right kind of meditation, So he devised a path, a particular path based on what he called dharma. So a human being, when he lives when he takes up this particular way of life, it leads gradually towards moral and spiritual development. So that was the scope given by Bhagavan Buddha and Buddhism at a later time. And the second thing about rituals were that the rituals were connected with, for example, certain closed groups at that time, certain closed sects at that time. And the actual spiritual knowledge was again confined to a select few people. For example, the actual spiritual knowledge was with the rishis who were doing tapasya in the forest or who were living a solitary lifestyle. Whereas the knowledge of these particular aspects remained with a few elite groups. So therefore, the spiritual knowledge was not indeed widespread. So the spiritual knowledge, the actual spiritual knowledge, it was confined to a very select few groups of people at that time. So the caste rigidity was too severe, and therefore people did not have access to proper spiritual truths. So as a result, people were, in the first place, they were unaware of what is actual spiritual truth. And second thing, if they try to approach the spiritual truth, they have to go through all these rituals and so on. And it is indeed very difficult to break all the social rigidity at that time. So there were hundreds of obstacles which were faced by the ordinary man at that time. So when Buddhism came into effect, it opened the spirituality to everyone. So spirituality remained accessible to one and all during and after the time of the Buddha. So for the first time in history, the spiritual truths were demonstrated and it was made really accessible to the public. And one more thing about the Buddhism is that, and Bhagavan Buddha, is that he spoke in the language of the masses, which an ordinary person can easily understand. So in those days, most of the knowledge part which we had, it is all written in Sanskrit language. And again, it was only a select few people who can read or write or converse fairly well in that Sanskrit language, though there was a golden period at that time. But later on, again, it became connected with a closed group of people. So it was not fairly accessible to a large number of people at that time. So when Bhagavan Buddha came, he made this grand revolution of speaking spiritual truths in the language of the common people. So in the language of the common people, as he can easily understand, as he can easily grasp the spiritual truths. So this was the greatest revolution at that time. So the first thing is that the complications connected with the rituals. And the second thing is that the accessibility of spiritual truths for the common masses. And third thing is that the language flexibility. So Buddha adopted this Pali language, which was vogue at that time, and because of that he was able to reach the common masses. So the religion became widespread throughout that time. Later on, there were several Buddhist monasteries erected throughout India with the help of the kings who patronized the religion at a later time. So Buddhism, later on, it became a proper missionary religion. It can be said it was the first and formally instituted or institutionalized religion in the world. So Buddha was born before Jesus Christ, and Buddha instituted this Sangha, the Sangha which later they propagated Buddhism. So he made religion as a proper institution, as a proper vehicle to carry the religion on a later date or for a later period. So it became a proper missionary religion. And missionary religion in the sense, they do not convert based on a threat basis. And again, they did not, there was no, what do you call it, a coercion to, or applying some pressure to convert and so on. So absolutely, there was none at all. So the religion spread purely based on love and compassion. So they demonstrated the religion in their life. The people who practiced the religion, the monastics and the lay disciples who practiced this religion, they demonstrated in their practical life, and which was carried forward to the public, saying that we have practiced and we have obtained the results. If you practice, you too can obtain the same result. So the teachings were, or the missionary activities were purely taken up, not on the basis of threat or not on the basis of coercion and so on. It was purely based on love and compassion and a spirit of service towards fellow human beings, or a spirit of service, attitude of service towards fellow beings. So that was the attitude at that time. And there were several incidents connected with the life of the Buddha, which is an eye-opener to many of, even it can be applied in the current scenarios also. For example, the rituals connected with the animal sacrifice, for example. So during his life, Buddha, he came across a site where this animal sacrifice was carried out. So Buddha, he intervened and he stopped that animal sacrifice. And once during that intervention, the guards, they reported this particular intervention to the king, and the king came and they had a conversation. The conversation is very beautiful and it is very simple. So Buddha said, why do you sacrifice this innocent creature? Instead, you can sacrifice me, you will get more benefit out of it. So the king was shocked and taken aback, and he said, oh, you are an enlightened soul, how we can't do it, he said. Buddha said, see, you are doing a karma which can generate a negative effect. For example, killing is an act which creates an adverse karma. Any act of killing consciously, or any act of deliberate killing of innocent creatures is bound to create adverse karma in a life. So this is the basic dharma or principle. So Buddha reasoned that if it is going to generate an adverse karma, how this is going to benefit you, how this ritual sacrifice is going to benefit your kingdom. So how this ritual sacrifice is going to benefit for the prosperity of your kingdom and so on. So finally it dawned on the king that the ritual sacrifices were wrong, and later on they were abolished by that king. If we observe that during the time of Ashoka, on a later period, we find that there were numerous hospitals which were opened for the treatment of animals. There were numerous veterinary clinics at that time which were present at that time. So this was the effect of Buddhism not only upon the ordinary people, but even upon the other beings. So even poor creatures were taken care of, they were given care, and so one of the most significant aspect of the religion of Buddhism is that it came away from it took a step, or it took a position wherein it did not advocate this animal sacrifice. It reasoned saying that this animal sacrifice is bound to create certain adverse karma, and therefore Therefore, it is not a proper thing to do. So in those days, as we read in the Puranas or as we read in the ancient literature, we find the kings conducting rituals on a large scale, conducting rituals on a grand scale, sacrificing hundreds of animals and so on. So, because of the effect of Buddhism and because of the effect of the practice of compassion towards living creatures, all these rituals became toned down on a later period. They gradually reduced. Later on, we can't say completely that the kings abruptly stopped everything. Later on, it became toned down. So this was the effect of Buddhism on the society at that time. And one more important question which is connected with the Buddhism is the question of God. So many people ask this question: did Buddha believe in the idea of God or not? So the same question was even asked to the Buddha. So many people, even one of the followers or lay disciples came to him and asked about the question of existence of God. Buddha remained silent to this particular question, which later on was interpreted in a different sense, in a different way. Later on, that served as a philosophical basis. That silence of the Buddha, it later on became a philosophical basis for later philosophical systems which evolved out of Buddhism. So the reason for being silent to this particular question is that I would say that that particular question is in no way is connected with the enquiry or the thought process of the Buddhistic religion. You can say it is out of question or out of syllabus. The first thing the concern of the Buddhism was solely towards how to mitigate the suffering of a being, how to mitigate the suffering or how to mitigate the existential ills or the existential crisis. He gives this beautiful example. He says that if a person is struck by an arrow, for example, if I am struck by an arrow behind me, what would be my immediate reaction? My immediate reaction would be to take the arrow out of my body. I would not be thinking who has shot this arrow and what is the velocity it traveled and so on. So my first thing would be to be free from this crisis which I am into right now. So Buddha says that, or the Buddhistic thought process is solely connected with providing a relief for suffering or providing a relief to existential crisis. So in no way there is an inquiry or a process or a thought process connected with the idea of God. So for example, it can be taken up as a sort of inquiry in physics, wherein a solution from other branches of science can't be applied in a physical science. For example, a grammatical solution can't solve a problem in physics. Similarly, a scientific solution or a particular physics concept can't solve a particular grammatical problem. So they were incompatible. The thought processes and the inquiries surrounding the life of the Buddha were totally incompatible with the idea of God. And again, if we take up the life of Sri Ramakrishna, for example, his idea of inquiry about the world, his idea of inquiry about the existence and the phenomena, everything is centered or connected with the God. And therefore the solution he arrived was an idea which is based on completely on God. He had this realization that God is immanent in all beings and so on. Whereas the Buddhism, the thought processes, they are all connected on a different subject, on a different level of inquiry, or is in no way connected with this process or idea of God, and therefore they arrived at a particular solution which did not have this particular concept of God. So Buddha attained a particular state of nirvana where he found he has freed himself from all existential ills, wherein he has destroyed the karma and wherein he has attained the supreme state of bliss. So that was the state which Buddha had arrived. So therefore, a lot of we can't say that Buddhism religion is totally incompatible with Hindu religion. I would say these two are different sets of inquiries that has to be taken up as a different sets of inquiries by an aspiring human mind for a particular solution. You are looking for a particular solution with a particular thought process and you arrive at a solution. And Buddha took up a particular thought process, he devised a method and he arrived at a particular solution. Sri Ramakrishna took up particular thought process, he took up a particular sadhana and he arrived at a particular solution. So we can't say that they are incompatible, they may be mutually supportive of each other, or there's some aspects in the Hindu religion which we can compensate some of the aspects by the Buddhistic philosophy or the Buddhistic religion. So in both ways they can be said as complementary. So both Hinduism and Buddhism can be termed as complementary. They complemented each other in some areas. For example, if a particular thing was lacking in a certain area, the other area, it complemented it. And if the Buddhism lacked certain aspects, Hinduism complemented it. So both were complementary, and again, the thought processes, the approach towards human life, or the approach towards questions of life, or the approach surrounding the phenomena of life are totally different in both these things. So we have to take up this particular thing into account while reading or while reading both this religion, or while doing a comparative study of both Hinduism and Buddhism. So the set of inquiries are different in Buddhism and Hinduism. So in the life of Buddha, we find that this process of inquiry began exactly when Buddha witnessed a person who is old, and a person later on he came across a person who is ill with a disease, and later on he came across a person who is dead. So these were the three things that triggered a spiritual inquiry in the mind of the Buddha. So as we know that the old age is inevitable. As soon as a person or a being which has taken a birth, old age is an inevitable thing. So Buddha during at that time was deeply shocked even to find the existence of people at that time who were old. So it was devised by his father that they made such an arrangements that he should not look upon such sights. So on the second, the sight which Buddha looked upon was upon a person who was ill with a disease. So if in normal situation, if we are hale and hearty, if we are very healthy, we feel life to be full of energetic and full of strong. But again, if we fall ill or if we fall sick, remember the pain associated at that time. And again, there was the sight of this dead person. So there dawned upon the mind of the Buddha, it awakened a sense in him, this can't be real and this should not be real. And the processes which we have got into life, there is something wrong with it and it has to be remedied, it has to be rectified. So he found that this cycle is going to repeat itself. For example, birth, life and death is again going to repeat itself on a future date. It is going to repeat itself. This process is going to repeat itself again and again. Therefore, he found that this has to be contained and therefore a solution has to be obtained for this particular process which a being is into. And he found that the process which sustains this being is that, or which is sustained through the ignorance, is the desire. He found that desire as the motive force for a being to gather karma or to enter into this particular process. And he found that this desire has to be eliminated to achieve what he termed as the true state of bliss. Whereas normally in the state of bodily existence, whatever we experience, the objects which are connected with our desires are but empty. They just can at best can give a momentary pleasure, and they give the maximum pain at the end. So that was the conclusion, or that was the conclusion arrived by the Buddha. So he found that desires are empty. It creates but emptiness. They give a momentary pleasure for a time being, but later on they give plenty of pain in a life. Therefore he found that the thought processes which are centered on the desire was the thing which has to be eradicated. So that was a particular thing, that particular thought process has to be eliminated in order to achieve the true bliss. So therefore, Buddha took to the life of renunciation, and he severed all ties with the kingship and with his kingdom. Later on he did tapasya, and after 6 years of very hard struggle, he achieved a supreme state of bliss, which is termed as nirvana. And he experienced such a state of bliss. He felt that I should continue in this state. So I don't wish to teach this truth to my fellow beings. So that was one of the first thoughts that he had. But later on, he revised this thought. Later on, he felt that there are several beings which are undergoing suffering, and there are several beings which are capable of appreciating his truth, and there are several beings which has attained a particular state of spiritual maturity, who will be able to take up this spiritual truth and practice in their life and achieve the state. Therefore, Buddha set out to give the spiritual truth to one and all who sought this particular truth. So that was one of the biggest decisions which he ever made, or which was made for the benefit of the humanity. So remember, if we have got plenty of treasures in our life, so the first thought would be, let me enjoy this treasure for myself. But later on, the thought was that, let everyone enjoy this treasure. Let us give the opportunity for everyone to have this treasure also. So that was the magnanimity, or that was the compassion which Buddha had for all beings. So he gave this treasure to everyone. And the whole summary of Buddhism can be termed in this one particular set of practice, which is connected with the eradication of desires. So in our normal day-to-day life, we find innumerable desires constantly bubbling in our mind. So there is no way, sometimes we find it very difficult to stop all these mental thought processes connected with our desires. Suppose if we stand as a witness to this particular thought processes, and if we practice a kind of detachment towards a particular object, we find immense pleasure arising out of that particular thought processes. Later on, if we practice it consistently together with leading a right life, or the eightfold path as suggested by the Buddha, we find that a person gradually improving himself, and day by day is coming closer to the state of the nirvana which Buddha had attained. So he gave this simple method that extinguish your desire, because desire is what is holding us into this particular being. Once the desire is completely eliminated, a person can achieve the state which the Buddha has attained. So Buddha has showed that the state can be attained by one and all. So nirvana is not a particular propriety of Bhagavan Buddha alone. So it is a common property for all. And he has exemplified in his life that this particular state can be attained by everyone. It is not that you cannot attain this particular state, it is impossible for you. No. All human beings are capable of attaining to this state. So that is the demonstration which Buddha had given in his life. He said that I have attained, so this is the process I went through, and if you follow the same process, you too can attain it. You too can experience the same thing which I have experienced. So once this desire is eliminated or eradicated, there comes a supreme peace in the life, where we find everything falls off. So whatever through ignorance a person has accumulated, the karma, everything is burnt, and once the karma part is completely burnt, that knowledge, the supreme knowledge dawns, and that knowledge is beyond what we call it frees a person from all these existential crises, all these existential ills and so forth. So in our everyday life, we have this question, or on a particular, or a crisis arises wherein we have this questions, we ask this question, is this what human life is leading to, or what is the solution for this death, or what is the solution for the illness or pain which I am into? So when we consciously examine or when we consciously put into practice or the teachings which are taught by the great ones, we find that slowly that we align ourselves to spiritual truths rather than following the mundane life processes. We consciously became aware of the crisis which is in store for every one of us in life, and consciously aligning ourselves to a particular set of spiritual practices which can free us from all these crises, and finally achieving a state wherein we can overcome everything and wherein we can achieve the supreme state. So one thing is connected with our day-to-day crisis and the enquiry related to that crisis. Second thing is that consciously becoming awakening or becoming aware of oneself, or becoming aware of one's strengths and weaknesses, or becoming aware of this phenomena, becoming aware of these conditions in life. Slowly adopting a process, adopting a particular process, particular spiritual process, and being conscious of it and applying it in day-to-day life, and finally getting the benefit out of that particular process. So this process has to be made conscious. So many times we find that during the time of crisis, our reaction will be at the best emotional. So we have this kind of emotional reaction to a situation. These emotional reactions, we find it dies down after a period of time, say after a few weeks or a few days. So the intensity or the intensity of that particular reaction, it comes down over a period of time, and thereby we became again involved ourselves in the normal life process. So the awakening which is achieved by a particular crisis must be, or we can say for a normal a person who is involved in this processes, the intensity has to be maximized, or the particular intensity has to be sustained, or that particular intensity has to be taken forward into spiritual practice. It has to grow in maturity. It should not be a reaction. Spirituality can't be a reaction. Spirituality is a mature process wherein we became aware of the situation, wherein we become the conscious of the process, and wherein we adopt a particular practice consciously, and then we move towards goal step by step. It is not just a reaction. If we follow reaction, we will be disappointed. because the reaction, it takes you nowhere. We make decisions abruptly, and that most of the time we find our decisions to be wrong. Sometimes the decisions can't be sustained. So we need a sustainable, conscious spiritual practice which can give a solution, or which can give a solution for the spiritual problem which a person is undergoing, or a particular crisis which is involved in life. So the Buddha in his life has demonstrated that it is possible. That take up this particular method consciously, practice it, and you can achieve it. So he has demonstrated that each and every one of us is capable of achieving the end of the reaching that culmination part, the reaching that culmination of spirituality, what spirituality can lead to. So that end part can be achieved. So that is the result. So Buddhism, again, it has brought a lot of set of good practices to our society. We have borrowed a lot of good practices in our society, service, in the form of service, or in the form of compassion, in the form of showing kindness to creatures, and so on. So Buddhism has inspired countless lives throughout, from the time of its existence even till now. Buddhism is continuously inspiring people throughout the world to seek a solution for existential ills which are connected with human life. And if that particular thought processes, if a person gets engaged in that particular thought process, if he explores the possibilities, he can achieve the state as in the life of the Buddha. So with this we can in this talk, if you have any doubts, we can discuss here connected with Buddhism or the life of the Buddha. That's what. Both these set of enquiries are different. So what Sri Ramakrishna inquired, he had a set of queries which are totally different from the set of queries which is explored by the Buddha. For example, Sri Ramakrishna in his life had the question about the existence of God. So the query started with the idea of God itself directly, whether God exists in reality, whether is he true, and so on. Or the question related even with connected with the life processes of a worldly life which he is put into. Whereas the set of queries which led Buddha is completely different. He found, he was into this kind of seeking solution for an existential crisis. So the set of queries were different, the thought processes were different, the mindsets were different. So one aspiration was different, this aspiration was completely different. So they were different aspirations. So it is based on an individual disposition. For example, some beings are oriented towards God. We have a natural disposition towards the idea of God. But some people do not have this natural disposition towards a particular idea of God. They have the other set of queries. So that was a difference. The set of queries were different. So we'll finish this talk here. We'll close it here. Right. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.